Sure, a terrific question. So the MDBs, for people who don't know this world, stands for Multilateral Development Bank.
Yeah.
So the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, as well as like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank, are really owned by countries. So Egypt is an owner, and they really lend to countries.
Yes.
And so these multilateral development banks come in and kind of fill the space when there isn't really enough money from the private sector.
Yes.
So what they'll do is try and mobilize capital to help build, as you noted, better, more sophisticated infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so that's what institutions like the AIIB and the other MDBs are all about.
Yeah.
You know, for when you think about like a great country like Egypt, you know, everyone wants better infrastructure.
Yeah.
But why is it not yet there? So sometimes there's government policies, but the reality, there's what we call an infrastructure financing gap. So there's not enough money flowing in to build the infrastructure. So the multilateral development banks like the AIIB or the ADB or the Inter-American Development, all these banks around the world will partner with government. So it really is about partnership.
Yeah.
So when people in Egypt want to say, well, why isn't my infrastructure better? What could the AIIB do here? It's great that they scrutinize any AIIB projects here, as well as World Bank projects, but they should also be saying to the government, these are our priorities. Is it clean water? Is it more power? Is it more roads?
Yeah.
So it's really filling a gap is how these institutions will help a place like Egypt, and it should be in partnership with the Egyptian government.
Yes.
Well, you know, it's really one part of a bigger solution that needs to be focused on. So even when I think about a place like Egypt, or I'm based in Asia with something called the Milken Institute, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that is also about building prosperity. When I think about institutions trying to help governments and partners, I go back to what I call the little brick. So everyone knows the big brick, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. But people will say to me, why can't Egypt be a member of the brick also? And I say I worry less about the big brick. I worry about what I call the little brick, which is bureaucracy, it's regulation, it's inequality and corruption. And so in Egypt or any nation needs to figure out how they address bureaucracy, regulation, inequality, and corruption if they are going to move the countries forward. And I say that's a bigger and more important issue that needs to be addressed versus, oh, I want more money from the AIIB or ADB or World Bank. Well, I think one part of it is just having the private sector be here. So how great to see private sector representatives, including from Egyptian private sector. But what they also need to do is think through, are there policy changes that need to be done? Are there other reasons where the private sector might be choosing a different country than Egypt? Remember, it's not just what Egypt does, it's what Egypt does compared to other nations in this region, on this continent. Because the private sector, I think one of the speakers, the finance minister, says, ultimately the private sector can look at another market. They're not wedded to one specific market unless they're from that country. And so I think that's what the AIB, the World Bank, the ADB also need to be doing, thinking through what are the changes that countries also need to think about if they do want to get the private capital, which is so essential to growing a nation. Well, currently, that's my hope. You're Egyptian, I bet that's your hope too. But really, I always say to people, ultimately, it's up to the Egyptian people, it's up to the Egyptian government on how fast and at what pace they want to move forward. So we talk about sophisticated infrastructure, but I say don't
more resilient to the climate change also.
Honestly, but don't forget about the very basics, that sometimes less expensive can be better. I mean, look how amazing India is and sending something to the moon or to Mars and doing it relatively inexpensively. So don't think you always need bigger loans or bigger grants. You need better infrastructure, which might not be the most expensive infrastructure in the world.
Thanks a lot for this interview.
What a delight to be here in Egypt again.
Thanks.